Greta stood at the edge of the sprawling estate, the imposing mansion looming before her like a specter from another time. The countryside stretched out in all directions, a patchwork of green and gold, but all she could feel was the weight of her past pressing down on her. She had left everything behind, the bruises, the fear, the suffocating grip of an abusive relationship, and now she was here, seeking refuge in the home of the Heelshires, a wealthy couple known for their reclusiveness. The job as a nanny was supposed to be her fresh start, a chance to rebuild her life. But as she approached the grand entrance, uncertainty gnawed at her. The Heelshires welcomed her with a warmth that felt almost too forced, their smiles tight-lipped as they ushered her inside. The mansion was opulent, adorned with antiques and lavish decor, but there was an unsettling stillness in the air, as if the house itself held its breath. Greta's heart raced as she followed them through the dimly lit corridors, the shadows dancing on the walls, whispering secrets she couldn't quite grasp. It was in the parlor that they revealed their most peculiar request. "You will be caring for our son, Brahms," Mrs. Heelshire said, her voice laced with a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. Greta blinked, trying to process what she was hearing. "Your son?" she echoed, confusion clouding her thoughts. And then they brought him into view, a life-sized porcelain doll, eerily lifelike, with delicate features and glassy eyes that seemed to follow her every movement. "He's our Brahms," Mr. Heelshire added, his tone reverent. "You must treat him as if he were alive." Greta's skepticism flared, but desperation to keep the job silenced her doubts. She nodded, accepting the extensive list of rules they handed her, each one more bizarre than the last. She was to feed him, read to him, and ensure he was always dressed and cared for as if he were a real boy. The thought of it was absurd, but the Heelshires' unwavering conviction left her little choice. She felt trapped in a surreal nightmare, yet the promise of a paycheck and the hope of a new beginning kept her anchored. As the days turned into weeks, Greta found herself slipping into the strange routine of Brahms's care. She prepared meals, set the table for two, one for herself, one for the doll, and read stories aloud, her voice echoing off the walls of the cavernous room. At first it felt ridiculous, but as she went through the motions, a part of her began to accept this bizarre reality. Yet, with each passing day, the atmosphere in the mansion grew heavier, more oppressive, as if the house itself were alive, watching her. It started with small things. Greta would leave the room for a moment, only to return and find Brahms in a different position. His head tilted slightly, or his hands moved just enough to make her question her own sanity. She dismissed it at first, attributing it to her imagination, but the unease settled deeper into her bones. The creaking of the floorboards echoed in the silence, and sometimes she thought she heard whispers, soft and unintelligible, drifting through the air like a warning. Then came the nights, when the shadows seemed to stretch and twist, and the darkness felt like a tangible presence. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of her past, the memories of her ex-husband's rage flooding back with every creak of the house. The isolation was suffocating, and she often found herself longing for the companionship of another human being, someone who could validate her experiences, someone who could reassure her that she wasn't losing her mind. One evening, after a particularly unsettling day, Greta decided to confide in Malcolm, the local grocery delivery man who had shown her a flicker of kindness. He was a curious soul, always asking questions, his eyes sparkling with a mix of sympathy and intrigue. As she spoke about the strange occurrences in the mansion, she noticed the way his expression shifted, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "You're not the first to feel that way," he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder as if the walls had ears. "The Heelshires have a history, you know. Brahms. He's not just a doll to them." Greta's heart raced as he recounted the tragic tale of the Heelshire family. Brahms had been a real boy, isolated from the world, his life shrouded in mystery and sorrow. The whispers of the past hung heavy in the air, and she felt a chill run down her spine as Malcolm spoke of the boy's obsession with the very doll that now sat in the parlor. They say he never really left, he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, that he's still here, watching, waiting. The unease that had been building within her turned to dread, and she returned to the mansion with a sense of foreboding. The house felt different now, the air thick with tension. She followed the rules more diligently, hoping to appease whatever force seemed to linger in the shadows. But as she did, the occurrences grew more intense. She began to find notes, scrawled in a childlike handwriting, placed in odd corners of the house. They were simple messages, cryptic and unsettling, and they sent shivers down her spine. One night she awoke to the sound of her name being called, a soft voice echoing in the darkness. "Greta!" It was unmistakable, a whisper that curled around her like a tendril of smoke. She bolted upright, her heart racing, and glanced toward the parlor where Brahms sat, his porcelain face illuminated by the pale moonlight. The doll seemed to shift slightly, as if it were leaning closer, and she felt the air grow colder. Desperate for answers, Greta turned to the internet, researching the Heelshire family and their tragic past. The more she uncovered, the more the pieces began to fall into place. The stories of Brahms's isolation, the whispers of his disturbing obsession, and the untimely death that had left the Heelshires in a spiral of grief painted a picture of a family trapped in their own sorrow. She felt a connection to their pain, a reflection of her own struggles, but the darkness surrounding them felt suffocating. The tension in the house escalated, and she found herself caught in a web of fear and uncertainty. The whispers grew louder, the shadows more pronounced. She began to see glimpses of movement out of the corner of her eye, fleeting figures that vanished when she turned to look. The line between reality and her imagination blurred, and she felt herself spiraling deeper into a nightmare. One evening, as she confronted Brahms in the dim light of the parlor, she felt an overwhelming urge to break free from the torment. "What do you want from me?" she shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. The doll remained silent, its expression unchanging, but she could feel the weight of its gaze upon her. It was as if the house held its breath, waiting for her to make a choice. In a moment of desperation, Greta sought out Malcolm again, her heart racing as she poured out her fears. "I think Brahms is trying to communicate with me," she confessed, her voice trembling. "But I don't know what it means." Malcolm's eyes darkened, and he leaned closer, his voice low and urgent. "You need to be careful. The past has a way of haunting those who disturb it." With renewed determination, Greta returned to the mansion, ready to confront the darkness that had enveloped her. She decided to take matters into her own hands, convinced that the only way to end the haunting was to destroy Brahms. The thought filled her with a mix of dread and resolve. If the doll was the source of her torment, then breaking it would free her from the grip of the past. That night, she gathered her courage and confronted the doll, her heart pounding as she raised a heavy object above her head. But just as she was about to strike, a sudden realization washed over her. The doll was not just an object, it was a vessel for something far more sinister. She hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to stop, but the anger and fear coursing through her pushed her forward. With a shattering crash, the porcelain doll broke apart, pieces scattering across the floor. But as the dust settled, a chilling revelation struck her. Brahms was not merely a doll, he was alive. The remnants of the doll revealed a hidden compartment, and within it lay a small, tattered journal. Greta's hands trembled as she opened it, the pages filled with frantic scrawls that chronicled a life lived in shadows. As she read, the truth unfolded before her. Brahms had survived a horrific accident, hidden away in the walls of the mansion, his existence a twisted reflection of the love and grief that had consumed the Heelshires. He had been watching her, manipulating the events around her, driven by a desperate obsession that blurred the lines between love and madness. Panic surged through her as she realized the extent of his control. The whispers, the movements, the eerie presence that had haunted her. It was all him, lurking in the shadows, feeding off her fear. She felt the walls closing in as the realization hit her like a tidal wave, drowning her in horror. In that moment, the atmosphere shifted, the house groaning as if it were alive, a manifestation of Brahms's twisted psyche. She could feel him drawing closer, his presence wrapping around her like a noose. The shadows danced with malevolence, and she knew she had to escape before it was too late. Greta bolted from the parlor, her heart racing as she navigated the labyrinthine hallways, the echoes of her footsteps mingling with the whispers that chased her. She could feel Brahms' gaze upon her, a chilling reminder of the darkness that had consumed her life. The fear that had once been a distant echo now roared to life, propelling her forward. As she reached the entrance, she felt a sudden rush of cold air, a force pulling her back, but she refused to relent. With one final push, she burst through the door and into the night, the moon casting a pale light over the expanse of the estate. She ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps, the mansion receding behind her, a dark silhouette against the sky. But even as she fled, a lingering question hung in the air. Was she truly free? The haunting presence of Brahms lingered in her mind, a shadow that would forever be a part of her. The cycle of horror had been broken, but the scars remained, a reminder of the darkness that had almost consumed her. In the days that followed, Greta tried to reclaim her life, but the memories haunted her. She would catch glimpses of shadows out of the corner of her eye, hear whispers that sent shivers down her spine. The past had a way of lingering, and as she sought solace in the daylight, the darkness of the Heelshire mansion loomed in her mind. She had escaped the physical confines of the mansion, but the emotional chains remained, binding her to the memories of her time with Brahms. The doll had been a manifestation of grief, a vessel for the unresolved pain that had haunted the Heelshires, and now it was a part of her story too. As she walked through the countryside, the beauty of the landscape felt tainted by the shadows of her past. The sun shone brightly, but the darkness lingered, a constant reminder that some things could never truly be escaped. The whispers of Brahms echoed in her mind, a chilling reminder that the past was never truly behind her. Greta had faced the darkness and emerged, but the question remained, would she ever truly be free? The haunting presence of Brahms would linger, a reminder of the fragility of the human spirit and the shadows that could consume even the brightest of souls. In the end, she knew that the journey to healing would be long and arduous, but she was determined to reclaim her life, one step at a time, even as the echoes of the past whispered in the shadows.